people kind of look at the book as like, yeah, this is a cool insight into how, you know, what the mental breakdown and the fucked up thing about you that becomes a comedian. But it really just started with these letters. I thought I was going to write a silly, fun book where here's this bunch of letters my mother saved that are all funny stories of me doing the opposite of what I was told to do. It's this funny kind of theme. It lends itself to the whole American psyche, which is we're all rebels. You know, the whole James Dean riding off into the sunset, and, you know, the fact that our creation myth, I mean, very Boston thing, was about throwing tea in the ocean and fighting our oppressors. And so to me it was just like, okay, this will be a cool project. Then I get into it and I start realizing how deep that I'm trying to find out where does this come from, and I realized, well, my dad was 6'2", drank a lot, hit me, and I had this problem with authority from a very young age, and I just was, I was putting it out on teachers and the police and then later comedy club audiences, and the book got way heavier. I did not mean to write a book that people tell me they cry when they read. People tell me like family members go like, oh my God, you're so honest, like almost like, why the fuck are you so honest? And it's just sort of like, so I didn't know what the ending of the book was. I just knew what the beginning was. And it took a year and a half and a lot of therapy, a lot of talk therapy, a lot of psychopharmacology, and, you know, the deepest depression I've ever been in. Like, this book took me where I did not plan to go. And it ended in a place that I never would have imagined it would end, you know, with the, you know, after my dad's death, collecting myself and figuring out what my life means and all this heavy shit. But it's, when you say my first memoir, it is my memoir. This is the last time I will write about my life. I think the first time I went to therapy was, yeah, when I was dealing with, see, I grew up in a culture where, like, there was no drinking and driving. There was just driving. There was no, you know, domestic abuse. There was just discipline, and like everything that you know, like I talked about on stage in the last show, like I didn't know what masturbation was until something exploded out of my penis after itching it for an hour. Like, I was working without any rule book in my life. And so when I got into my 20s and I started talking to kids in college, and they were like, what the fuck kind of life did you lead? And I realized that my dad was an alcoholic, and I spent one summer home, and I was walking him home from bars, and I was kind of looking at stuff through a different set of eyes for the first time, and it made me deal with stuff. So I went to some therapy, but that therapist was really hot, and she was like just maybe 5 years older than me, and I wanted to fuck her so bad. And I was getting nothing done, but I would go and she'd wear dresses, and every time she'd like cross her legs, it was like Basic Instinct, and, you know, she would see me looking down her shirt. It was ridiculous. And like, she would even get on the tee with me sometimes and ride past my stop, but like totally inappropriate. We came to a stand-up show once to see me. Meanwhile, I'm paying her to professionally help me with my fucked up things, and she's one of them. And I used to jerk off to her all the time, and I would hit on her. I would literally say, I want to have sex with you, like every other session. And she stopped wearing skirts, and she would blush when I'd say it. It was very erotic and totally ineffectual. I put a pencil up my ass once, too. No, just kidding. So I've always dealt with things by working a lot, like maybe a workaholic. I quit drinking 20 years ago. I don't cheat. And so my life, I've dealt with things by kind of not dealing with them, by working hard. I've pretty much stopped all fun things. And my hard work was focused on all the things that I hadn't dealt with. I was forced to write a book about all these unexamined things, like my dad and I didn't talk for 6 months before he died, and I was very close to him, and I felt guilty, and I just kept working through it all. And then when I was writing the book, I had to go back and look at these letters. I don't know where it came from, but I used to write these letters to my dad, and they're in the book, and, you know, these really heartfelt things where I was trying to cheer him up out of his bleak depressions, and I was trying to give him hope, and I don't know where it came from. I was like the most like caring, emotive person you've ever met, and he never mentioned the letters, and I always just thought, my dad thinks I'm gay. He won't address the fact that I wrote him these nice letters. He thinks I'm like a fucking homosexual. And so when I found them again, I hadn't really thought much about. I found them after he died, and he'd saved them all, and they were wrapped up very carefully, like every Father's Day card, every note, everything was there, and it was like, holy shit, I didn't know that I'd reached them. In therapy, you can go, yeah, I felt this thing, and it was hard, and you talk, and then you walk out, and, it's like mass. You go back for an hour the next week. But when you write a book, each small scene in your life takes a week to write. So you're sitting with these thoughts and feelings for a protracted period of time, and you're forced to, process them more. My mother, I should say, felt strongly about church and CCD class and receiving the sacraments. And my dad was an extremely moral, ethical man who really, did some very strong things in his life that showed what he was made of in terms of, quitting a job once because there was an engineer that was being let go because he had cancer, and taking in homeless people, and he did a phenomenal amount of charity work. They're incredible people. So I feel like I got my moral roadmap from that, and then the church was more for my mother, a socializing thing. I think that to this day my mother would really, really like me to go back to church. She goes back and forth, I think, on her belief, but it's a tremendous support to her, and it's strength for her, and I think that that's what church, in its best case scenario, is. It's a place where you find a community that will support you when you're going through bad times, and it is that for her. My generation is maybe more literal, and we have a hard time believing that a lot of animals got on a boat and it rained for a long time, and then there was a guy with a rib, and some other crazy shit happened. Yeah, I'm not into the Old Testament. I feel like the Old Testament is all fire and brimstone, and Ezekiel and Abraham, it's just really evil, horrible, gothic stuff. And then the New Testament, like Jesus, to me, he's John Lennon, and he's Gandhi, and he's peace and love. And to me, it's all the stuff that is groovy and cool. But when people say the Bible, I always stop and go, well, which one are you talking about? I mean, that's like saying, Meatballs, and then there was Meatballs 2. I mean, Meatballs 2 was a joke. It was ridiculous. And you flip it because it was really the second, the sequel was the good one with the Bibles. Every faith at its core is about forgiveness and love, and about sublimating your ego so that you can become a part of some universal force. And to me, the Orthodox people are about exclusion and about feeling better than. So, I have a hard time. I did a whole bit on the Ten Commandments on the last show. I'm just trying to drive as many people out of the showroom as possible. I used to do 5, 6, 7 sets a night in New York, and when I was in Boston, I would do 2 or 3 shows every night. We're doing a fucking interview! I'm just kidding. Come in. All right, thanks, Ramon. No idea what his name is, by the way. Looks like a Ramon. As far as people reading the book, I want them to understand the Irish American experience a little bit more. It's a very Northeast thing. My parents are Bronx Irish, and there was a very strong. There's a feeling that if you succeeded but you followed the rules, it's meaningless. That you had to do it by telling people to fuck off and doing it your own way. And I think that that's what did lead me to become a comedian, is because nobody can do what the other comedian already did, and it's a very anti-authoritarian voice. And so I think with the book I wanted to show that I don't just tell jokes, but that, the darker stuff and the heavier stuff is really where I think was my core. I don't think of myself as a silly person. I think about myself as carrying this heavy burden of guilt and shame and existential wondering, and I kind of want the book to have both. I want there to be laughs that pay off stuff that maybe is darker. So the first time I did stand-up, I was in high school, but it involved a lot of cocaine and drinking, and it was a dare, basically, to myself, because I love stand-up albums. I memorized stand-up albums, but then I got to Boston, and I was just immersed in the greatest comedy scene that will probably ever exist. And I caught the sweet spot, and I got to see guys like Don Gavin and Sweeney and Rogerson, and and some of the younger guys that I was coming up with were my peers. Guys like Joe Rogan and David Cross and Chris McGuire and Tom Cotter. They're all guys that I just got in the car with every night. We'd drive to Providence. We'd drive to Springfield, work for free, and just have a blast. And it was a really great happenstance for me to get started in. And I think that spirit of Boston very much was in keeping with the whole spirit of this book that I wrote about, anti-authoritarian and wise ass and in your face and I'm better than you. It's very confrontational style in Boston. And I really, really love that. Nick DiPaolo and that whole just like, oh yeah, fucking fuck you. You go down to Fuddruckers, you get a fucking, it's just, I loved it. I loved the rhythm of Boston comedy, and I think that the guys that were coming out of Boston and going to New York City were doing extremely well. Louis C.K. and I think that it was a reputation I was proud to have as a guy that had, made his way up through this kind of saloon comedy, and we just had this ability to work tough rooms in New York and deal with hecklers and grind out sets night after night, and then obviously there's been a lot of success with people that came up from that time also. I was at BU just after Mark Maron, and I think around the same time as Jeffrey Ross, and who else came out of BU? There was a couple other good comics that have come out of BU, and there's a few younger ones that are coming up now that are good. Mike Kaplan, and the scene then was very splintered. Dave Cross had Cross Comedy, and there were all these esoteric comics that lived in Cambridge and were doing sketch and more what is considered today alternative. It wasn't called that then, but it was for the guys that couldn't really handle these saloon rooms, that couldn't, that weren't going to do dick jokes and they weren't going to be aggressive because it wasn't who they were. There was a place for them, and there was a place for every type of comic. There were so many different rooms that each had their own personality, and so it allowed you it was a closed community in the sense that comics didn't come from outside of Boston to play Boston. Boston comics played Boston. And so it would seem like, well, that would get a little monotonous, except that there was so many different ways to be a Boston comedian, and the one thing you couldn't do was be like anybody else. I don't have that much good to say about living in Southern California. I mean, I'm there for work, It's not where my family is. It's not where, I've made a lot of friends there, and a lot of New Yorkers move out there. But people from California, I've never really connected to. It's almost like another country when you're a New Yorker. And so, the business is there, and I've had a nice run of job opportunities. And the stand-up scene is nothing out there. It's really just good-looking people that are managed by somebody. There's no balls to it. And the clubs are great. I mean, the Laugh Factory and the Improv, I love it. I mean, good crowds. But I don't always look at the lineups there as the way I would in New York. You go to New York, you're going to see Nick DiPaolo. You're going to see Chris Rock come in and Dave Attell and guys and good black comics, good Latino comics, Greer Barnes and Tony Woods, Patrice O'Neill. And you'll see every gay comics that are out that are funny. And in LA it's always like Mo Better Monday, which is like the only place that black comedians can perform. And then you've got like Gay Night, then you've got like Refried Beans, which is Refried Friday, which is like if you're a Latino comic. It doesn't feel like anything's really organic about it. So I don't know. I'll leave Los Angeles when I'm ready. I don't see roots going down. I've been there 11 years, and I'm thankful that things have been as good as they've been. My kids love it. My wife's been happy, and I do have good friends, but it's not where I'm supposed to be. I think what's exciting about TV now is the comedy shows on cable. Louis' show, Ray Romano's show, Men of a Certain Age, is very good. Mad Men's great. There's a couple other good shows that between FX and TNT, TBS, you're starting to see more development. Comedy Central is still finding their way. I think a lot of their programming has been after the fact, bringing in the blue collar comedy guys, or I think they've got a new guy over there who's good, and hopefully they'll start to put out stuff that's a little more cutting edge. But I don't see anything on the networks that's very good. I mean, it's hard. It's just that it's a disappearing audience, and they know to get advertisers they've got to appeal to a certain demographic that's not looking to be challenged by TV. And I don't have any I don't have pretensions that TV is supposed to be art. I always felt like stand-up is, and I feel like plays are, and I think independent movies are. But TV it's to sell soap, you know. And if you're going to take the money to do a development deal for a network show, you got to know these are the parameters, you know. And having in one of those deals right now, I'm not going to try to put, you know, some kind of a esoteric foreign film together. I'm going to do a show that is me, but at the same time has a shot, or I wouldn't have taken the deal. I mean, right now Showtime has got the edge. They've got a lot more programming that's interesting to people, and they're doing more stand-up than HBO is. But HBO still is HBO, and I think there's a certain cachet with having a show on there. You still got Larry David, and you've still got the budgets to put on shows like Boardwalk Empire. And, yeah, it's pretty amazing what they can do. And I worked on Lucky Louie, and I got to say working with HBO was a dream. I mean, very few notes, and they were good ones. And Showtime, I've got friends that are working on stuff over there, and they're really going for it. So premium channels is a good place to be. And I think everyone's trying to wrap their head around what the revenue is going to be, considering the internet is just growing faster than anybody imagined. And, you know, channels like Hulu that are going up, and the fact that you can get Netflix and Blockbuster, whatever you want without leaving the house. It's a real challenge, and it's going to become a reality faster than the networks were really ready for. So is there always room for a show that will become a Raymond or a Cosby show? No. It's really everyone's got to lower their expectations, and within that the breadth of what you can do creatively is much narrower also. I got a TV deal off the book, so I'm developing a sitcom with 20th Century Fox that's also called Dear Mrs. Fitzsimmons. And then, you know, it's just, I never thought of it as something that would get me more work, and I never thought of writing a second book. I mean, if I wrote another book, I think it would be a novel. I don't have enough life to write another book. That was it. That was my shot. And if I were to write another one, I would have to be like, you know, a lot of users, people that read the book will upload their letters to my website, and I put them up. And then I have certain celebrities that have the letters, and I'm trying to compile them. And if the book is successful enough, then I would think about doing one that's other people's letters. This deal I have with 20th Century Fox now is based on, kind of like in the book, it's about 3 generations of Irish guys, and it's like, you know, me growing up around all this alcoholism and this, you know, almost self-sabotage kind of rebellion. And then me moving away, like I did, getting sober, like I did, marrying a Jewish woman, like I did, except in the TV version she's Asian, because that's really what I was supposed to do. And then moving back home again and trying to protect my son from being reinfected by the original system. So it's a show that the head of 20th saw me do stand-up, and I had jokes that were dealing with this, and he kind of brought me in for a meeting and goes, there's a show there. You know, from your stand-up, I see a show. And so he's been great, and the woman that I'm dealing with over there is really, they get it, and I've so far had nothing but good experience in developing the show. And now the idea is find out if one of the networks want to shoot a pilot next month. And then I have a deal at Nickelodeon also. I've got a game show that's called Help Granny, and it's about me living at home with my grandmother with my 2 kids, because I got divorced and I have no money. And it's about my grandmother being wealthy because she lived this amazing life where she ran with the bulls with Picasso, and then, you know, she was there in Cuba during the uprising, and she's, you know, dated Bill Gates. And so along the way, she's got a Picasso, and she bought, you know, stocks in Microsoft early on, and she's got billions, but she won't give me any money because she kind of wants me living there. And she's forgetful, so she wants to tell her life stories, but she can't remember them. So we do this game show where people sit on her couch from the local community college, which will be real people, and she will get stuck telling a story. Like, you know, I was in Seattle, and in the capital. No, I was in Washington State, in the Capitol. What's the name of the Capitol again in Washington State? And then you clap in and you tell her Olympia, Washington, and you win points, and then you walk out of there with money. So it's this kind of hybrid sitcom game show idea that we're working on that I sold them a while ago. And then I'm doing that, and now I'm doing my radio show on Mondays. I'm doing 2 podcasts a week, and now it looks like I'm going to be running a pilot for this new show on E! In my spare time. It's too much.
Yeah, it's a lot of stuff.
And I was just taking a break after the book, but, you know, when you live in Los Angeles and you're 44 years old and you have jobs, you do them. You don't turn shit down because next month you don't know if you're going to get your pink slip. People kind of look at the book as like, yeah, this is a cool insight into how, you know, what the mental breakdown and the fucked up thing about you and the book got way heavier. I did not mean to write a book that people tell me they cry when they read. People tell me like family members go like, oh my God, you're so honest. Like almost like, why the fuck are you so honest? And it's just sort of like, so I didn't know what the ending of the book was. I just knew what the beginning was. And it took a year and a half and a lot of therapy, a lot of talk therapy, a lot of psychopharmacology, and, you know, the deepest depression I've ever been in. Like, this book took me where I did not plan to go. And it ended in a place that I never would have imagined it would end, you know, with the, you know, after my dad's death, collecting myself and figuring out what my life means and all this heavy shit. But it's, when you say my first memoir, it is my memoir. This is the last time I will write about my life. I becomes a comedian, but it really just started with these letters. I thought I was going to write a silly, fun book where here's this bunch of letters my mother saved that are all funny stories of me doing the opposite of what I was told to do. It's this funny kind of theme. It lends itself to the whole American psyche, which is we're all rebels. You know, the whole James Dean riding off into the sunset, and, you know, the fact that our creation myth, I mean, very Boston thing, was about throwing tea in the ocean and fighting our oppressors. And so to me it was just like, okay, this will be a cool project. Then I get into it and I start realizing how deep that I'm trying to find out, where does this come from? And I realized, well, my dad was 6'2", drank a lot, hit me, and I had this problem with authority from a very young age. And I just was, I was putting it out on teachers and the police and then later comedy club audiences.